To mark his victory, Timur had a tower of 20,000 human skulls built outside the city, a grim monument to any who dare oppose him.
What
Timur
in
now
the
turned his
world?
attention
The man who
his name
killed
meant iron.
5% of the world's population.
Legacy of the great Genghis Khan, he would both inspire and terrify the world around him. His name was Timur. And
Oh, Timur. Timur. Oh my gosh. Timur, the boss. The boss himself. Okay.
You've probably never heard of. Timur was born in modern
I heard of him, alright.
time Transoxiana, sometime after 1320. By his own account, his father was a minor noble in service to the Turks, but it's believed his father was actually a substantial political figure and only diminished by his son, so as to make his own accomplishments seem that much greater by comparison.
Alright, so we get in the lore of
Timur grew
Timur.
up in comparative comfort compared to the rest of his poor tribesmen, but that didn't stop the young Timur from getting into trouble. He was known to raid travelers for money and goods, and stories say that at one point he was shot twice with arrows while attempting to steal a sheep.
Oh my gosh. Oh
One to his hand,
goodness.
causing the loss of 2 fingers, and another to his leg, resulting in a crippling injury, would mark him for life. Timur spent his early years as a mercenary, which gave him the
Maybe that's why he ended up the way he did. Because those traumatic injuries, bruh. Could have left a freaking mental mark on him.
battlefield experience necessary to join in multiple military campaigns with the Khan of the Chagatai Khanate. Around 1360, Timur rose to prominence as a military leader, inspiring his troops despite his 2 major injuries. At one point, he would ride at the head of 1,000 horsemen, helping to subjugate the regions of Khwarezm and Urgench. At this time, Timur's patron Khwazagan was murdered, leading to a struggle for power. As numerous factions squabbled for power, Tuglu Timur of Kashgar invaded Transoxania, and Timur was sent to negotiate with him. Instead,
Dog, I need to learn about the countries in Central Asia around this time because I'm not too familiar with the countries and states that were around. Like, what is Transoxania? I don't know what the heck that is, bro. Like,
sensing an opportunity, Timur joined forces with the Khan of the Eastern Chagatai Khanate, and together they swept out anyone who would stand in the way of the conquest of Transoxania. As a reward for his service, Timur was made Prime Minister of Transoxania, with Tulu's son as a ruler. As situation, Timur abided briefly before fleeing with his brother-in-law, Amir Hussein. Together, the two waged a guerrilla war against the Chagatai Khans and their forces, expelling them from Transoxania and ruling over it himself. A throne can only seat one man, and soon Timur and Hussein were at each other's throats. Timur, however, had befriended the local people, gaining followers amongst the merchants, tribesmen, Muslim clergy, aristocracy, and farm workers.
Bro, he put more stats into charisma than the other dude.
Hussein, on the other hand, had alienated them, heavily taxed them, and then spent the tax money on himself.
Come on, Hussein, you need to put stats into charisma.
A force to eliminate
It's super important that you put stats into charisma.
his brother-in-law, and in 1370, Hussein surrendered himself to Timur. Shortly after, he'd be dead at the hands of an assassin, though all evidence points to Timur wanting to eliminate any loose ends and threats to his rule. But Timur was as wild as he
kind of
was
obvious, to be honest, how he'd do that.
Hussein murdered, he was able to legally marry his widow, Saray Mulk Khanum, a direct descendant of the legendary Genghis Khan. While Timur's own claims to his legacy of
Oh wow. Direct descendant? Look, I know Genghis Khan had a lot of descendants, but like direct descendant, that's like, damn.
Spurious at best, he now had a direct link to the mighty conqueror, and the right to become the ruler of the entire Chagatai tribe, sort of. Trying to rule both the Muslim world and the Mongol Empire led to some challenges, and Mongol tradition forbade Timur from directly ruling the Mongols because he wasn't a direct descendant of Genghis Khan. Instead, Timur set up a puppet ruler in his stead with ties to the Great Khan, and then pulled the strings of power from behind the scenes.
That is
His
smart.
marriage to Saray Mulk Khanum allowed him to declare himself royal son-in-law and granted him some legitimacy amongst the Mongols. Now, Timur turned his focus to expanding his growing empire, which he ruled by proxy. First, he turned his attention to the Khans of Jatah, which would be eastern Turkestan today, crushing any opposition and expanding his borders with each conquest. When the Russian people rose up against the Mongols who ruled over them, the Khan of Crimea, Tokhtamysh, took refuge in Timur's court. Initially, Timur befriended the exiled Khan and even provided him with support as Timur's forces helped to recapture Moscow.
Wait, I heard of that somewhat. Like the Turks were one of the only few people who actually were able to take Moscow or something like that.
Timur and Tokhtamysh's forces approached Moscow. They sacked and burned several small cities, sending thousands into slavery. On the 23rd of August, 1382, they laid siege to Moscow, but were initially repelled by Muscovites using firearms. After 3 days of bloody fighting, though, two sons of Dmitry of Suzdal, a Russian loyal to the Mongols, convinced the Muscovites to open their gates and no harm would come to them. Feeling the situation was ultimately hopeless, the citizens opened the gate, allowing the Mongols in. A tragic mistake that would end in 4,000 Muscovites put to death.
Oh, come on. Come on. The Muscovites, you were literally under the rule of these people. You should know what they're like by now.
Tokhtamysh turned his attention to the Lithuanians, defeating them around 1383 and expanding his own power further. However, in time, Tokhtamysh turned his attention to the south, with eyes on Timur's own territory. This would be a fatal error. Starting in 1385, as Timur conquered eastern Persia, Tokhtamysh and his Golden Horde backstabbed their former ally and patron, swooping into northwestern Iran. Timur was outraged at the betrayal, but his forces were heavily invested in the conquest of Persia, and it would take time to respond to the attack. This allowed Tokhtamysh to plunder several cities, making him a very rich man. However, at the Battle of the Kondurja River in 1391, Timur's forces defeated Tokhtamysh's own. Tokhtamysh's cavalry attempted to encircle Timur's forces, but the infantry held against the onslaught, and the cavalry, having been repelled, began to smash into Tokhtamysh's own infantry. The Golden Horde broke and ran, completely routed, and
oh wow, so this is what happened to the Golden Horde. Wow, I didn't know the Golden Horde. Okay, well, it does make sense though. But damn, I'm actually learning quite a bit here. I ain't gonna lie to you.
Despite the shame of defeat, Tokhtamysh recovered his position over the Golden Horde, and in the spring of 1395,
I'm surprised he's not dead.
Territory. Timur responded by raising a massive army to once and for all crush the Golden Horde, routing it at the Battle of the Terek River on the 15th of April, 1395. Timur didn't stop there, though, and his forces pushed deeper into Mongol territory, sacking all major cities of the ruling Khanate. Once more defeated, Tokhtamysh was deposed, and Timur occupied Moscow for a full year. However, with his attention turned north, revolt broke out across the newly captured Persia. This led to a brutal crackdown by Timur's forces, who massacred entire cities, building towers out of their skulls as a warning to any other would-be rebels. The warning worked, and Persia remained relatively stable, allowing Timur to set his eyes eastward. In India, Timur claimed that the Muslim sultans of Delhi were showing too much tolerance for their Hindu subjects. Under this false pretext, Timur invaded India, laying waste to every city and army in his way. By the end of 13...
How the heck can you make a casus belli out of that? Or pretext to, or just justification to all the people who don't know fancy words in English if you're not a native speaker. Even though a lot of native speakers don't really know what casus belli means. But how in the world do you make a justification out of that? Oh no, they're too tolerant of Hindus, let's go invade them. What?
1898, Delhi had been sacked so completely that all that was left was a pile of rubble. It would take the city an entire century to rebuild from the devastation. With India firmly under his control and an incredible wealth amassed from his conquests, Timur retired to his capital in 1399. However, keeping a grip on his territory was a difficult thing, and foreign powers were always probing the Timuride empire for weaknesses. Before 1399 was out, Timur was once more back on a war footing, this time in response to invasions of his territory by the Sultan of Egypt and the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I. Both had attempted to stake a claim over parts of his territory or over his protectorates, and Timur's final campaign would be one of brutal reprisal. First, he marched north to destroy the forces of Bayezid I. By 1402, Timur's forces had pushed back the Ottomans all the way to Ankara, where a final confrontation would see Bayezid.
Oh yeah, I already saw all that.
Much like Timur's brother-in-law had once done so many decades ago. Timur's forces pushed further into modern Turkey, laying siege to the city of Smyrna, which was occupied by Christian Knights Hospitallers, putting him in confrontation with European forces. After the European forces fell, his army rounded up all the survivors and then carried out a mass beheading, earning him great condemnation from some parts of European leadership. Timur's forces also focused on re-establishing control in Azerbaijan, and then moved on to Syria. They cut a swath through anyone who dared stand against them, moving by day and building fortified camps by night to discourage raids by Mamluk forces. In 1400, Timur stood before the gates of Aleppo, where Mamluk had chosen to stand in pitched battle. For 2 full days, the fighting raged until on the 3rd day, Timur sent his cavalry against the exhausted defenders. His cavalry staged swathing attacks against the flanks of the Mamluk formation, as a force of elephants from Timur's conquest of India suddenly smashed into the center ranks. Overwhelmed and demoralized, the Mamluks sounded a general retreat, making a break for the city gates. After a short siege, Aleppo fell.
Those elephants always come in clutch. I can't even lie to you, bro.
And Timur exacted his revenge. And the revenge Timur
it's always the elephants.
One of the most horrific
too broken
in sordid history. As his men swarmed into the city, they committed atrocities we can't mention on the inhabitants. Last to die were the men, who were beheaded as the women who survived were carted off into slavery. To mark his victory, Timur had a tower of 20,000 human skulls built outside the city, a grim monument to any who dare oppose him.
What
Timur
in the
now turned his attention
world, Timur has no chill, man. Yeah.
Where the ruler had executed Timur's ambassador on arrival. On the way, he sacked more cities, finally facing stiff opposition at the gates to Damascus itself. There, he faced off against Sultan Nasir ad-Din Faraj. But Timur's forces once more destroyed all opposition. Having heard the horrible fate of Aleppo, the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt sent a delegation to Timur asking him to spare the city and negotiate peace with him. Timur agreed, only to turn his forces loose on Damascus immediately after the delegation's withdrawal.
Oh my gosh.
Perhaps the greatest crime against humanity Timur undertook in Damascus, though, was the burning of the holy mosques. Approached by imams and other religious priests who asked Timur for mercy in the name of Allah, Timur agreed to allow the people to shelter inside the mosques. Any who could find shelter in the holy sites would be spared the plundering and pillaging to come. Assuaged by Timur's own proclaiming himself a Muslim warrior when fighting against Christian knights, the imams and priests returned to the city, ushering thousands into the shelter of the mosques. When over 30,000 people had found refuge in the mosques, Timur ordered his men to bar the doors, then set the buildings on fire. Every single refugee then burnt alive, with any other survivors enslaved. Timur also forcibly deported all of Damascus's artisans.
Dude, when you do these type of things though, and people start to like hear about it, you are encouraging people to basically fight harder and fight till the end. Like, and this is why being brutal isn't really the best way to go. When you have a reputation of actually being like not brutal, you tend to have an easier time getting people to just surrender and not fight till the end. But this is like, I don't know what the heck this nigga was on, but like, this is the first time I said the freaking N-word, but like, I don't know what else to say, man. I don't know. Like, what was he on? Golly.
His own capital, destroying Damascus's fabled prosperity overnight. It would take the city centuries to recover. Now, Timur turned his eyes on Baghdad, which had been captured by an alliance of Timur's enemies. He launched 7 sorties against the city from 7 different directions, and on the 7th sortie he ordered all of his divisions to attack at once. The defenders were immediately overwhelmed and the city soon fell. Timur gave a simple order to his besieging men. Each soldier was to return with 2 human heads. The army fell like a whirlwind of locusts on the city, where none were spared save for the city's scholars, who were forcibly deported back to Samarkand, leading to a prosperity of knowledge in the area for centuries to come. Baghdad, however, was destroyed nearly to a structure, its people completely annihilated. Timur even had his horsemen ride through the city, flattening the terrain and stomping all cultivatable land into dust. He was forced to end the destruction of the city only by the massive piles of rotting corpses, which, baking in the summer heat, had threatened to start a mass epidemic of disease amongst Timur's forces. With offers of submission from the
this man just woke up and literally chose violence.
Mamluk rulers, Timur turned to Samarkand to plot what would be his greatest conquest to date, the taking of China. However, on the way to fight against the Ming dynasty, Timur fell ill and suddenly died, sparing China the terrors that he'd sown across the Middle East and Eastern Europe.
Oh.
Now, go check out why Mao Zedong was the most...
God looked down and was like, you know what, Timur? All right, yeah, that's enough, all of you. You did enough. I was like, all right, bye-bye. Oh, my gosh. Look, man, you made it all the way to the end of the video. Make sure you like and subscribe, man. If you got any suggestions for me, make sure you comment down below. Alrighty, man. Check out my other stuff on my channel. Thank you for watching and goodbye.